It's very nice to talk with you. Yes, I am a scientist from Argentina. I spent 10 years of my life working in the Silicon Valley in California in the biotech world. And I found this corporate life to be so dehumanizing and going against everything I stood for that as soon as I could, I wanted to go back to my country and move to the farmland and build an eco-village. So I chose the province of Mendoza, where they have done a huge environmental struggle in the past by mobilizing in massive numbers to the roads to stop mega mining activities that were coming to the province in 2007. And a few years later, I arrived, and I chose to buy a farm in this land because of their environmental awareness. Mendoza is a desert. It's a famous wine region of Argentina, very beautiful, but really desertic. So defending the little water they have is in the DNA of people. And so this awareness drove me to Mendoza, knowing that in the future, if the environment was at risk, people would defend the environment and the water. So I bought a piece of land and I started building an eco-village, and everything was going well. We had the full support of the government. We were reactivating and repopulating a region that has been quite depopulated due to economic crisis and political crisis in Argentina. But the land is perfect, it's fertile and native and intact. So we were doing very well until the government brought fracking. And sadly, this was the same people that 10 years earlier had led the protest against mining and had used the popularity they got as defending water in a desert actually can translate into elections. They won the elections, and then as soon as they were government, they betrayed everything they stood for. So in 2017, at the end of the year, they started bringing fracking. Mendoza is unfortunately sitting on top of the world's second largest shale gas basin and the fourth largest shale oil basin in the world, which is called Vaca Muerta. It's about the size of Denmark. And the United Nations has warned that exploiting it fully will consume 15% of the global carbon budget that humanity has left, not to exceed the Paris Agreement 1.5 Celsius degrees. That's how big and how bad that is. So I found out that the government was withholding a secret study, an environmental impact study that they were keeping secret because the results were very bad on the first pilot wells of fracking, as they were revealing contamination of the water tables. So a whistleblower let me know this. They were very concerned. Not everyone was in bed with the government, with the history of Mendoza. A lot of people were very worried. So they were hiding the report, and they were planning to replace the results by fake ones that they were going to fabricate in a lab where the dean in a university, where the vice dean is at the same time a representative of the fracking company. So inspired by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks work, and in a very South American fashion with very low tech, we were able to obtain a copy of this report and decided to leak it and create EcoLeaks with a very basic website and a Facebook page, but with the urgency of knowing that this needed to be leaked into the public. So this led to really a revolution. People were outraged, and they mobilized by tens of thousands, the biggest ever anti-fracking movement in Argentina's history and likely in world's history, because we had some demonstrations had 15,000 people in towns that have only 30,000 inhabitants. So really massive involvement, engagement of the population. And that in turn turned me into the biggest target of political persecution and criminal cases, and that's what started in 2018 when we published the report. So soon after we published the report and the war broke out with the government, we continued to get reports and information on conflicts of interest and corruption, and continued to leak that in Mendoza in Argentina. But the persecution became so intense that I am not the only case, but I had to leave my country because of this. I became the person in Argentina with the highest number of criminal cases against me for fighting fracking. I had criminal cases brought against me even by the mayor of my city personally. They did operations against us like planting drugs in our farm, followed by a media operation saying we were drug dealers and should be persecuted. They also tried to invade the farm with forged documents made by the local government and using the bulldozer from the government to break into the farm to try to steal a piece and force us out. They failed with all of them, but the accumulation was driven to wear us down and to intimidate us, and eventually they succeeded in terms of the increased death threats that we got against me and my family. And in 2019 we decided to go to Germany because of this, and that's why I've been in Berlin. So the story of EcoLeaks has been mostly in 2018 in Argentina, and then as we continue to get some information, we publish it. But so far, it's kind of stagnated and at a pause, as here in Germany, I've been focusing more on trying to defeat the fracking industry that is destroying my homeland, and where Europe has a lot to do because a lot of the companies are from Europe and a lot of the products are coming to Europe. So I've been mostly focusing on the environmental side of things than on the publishing side for now. But I have plans to hopefully try to build EcoLeaks properly with the proper technology so that we can actually be a global platform. Yeah, the global north is playing a major role not only in fracking but in every aspect of global warming. While European governments are committing to the Paris Agreement and reducing emissions and signing different declarations of commitments to the climate. But unfortunately, there is a double standard. While they do all of this, they are not only allowing their companies, but even promoting and often subsidizing them. Some of the world's biggest oil multinational companies, such as BP, Shell, Repsol, Wintershall from Germany, Total from France, they are the world's biggest players in fracking, for example. And they are the biggest holders of land in Argentina, where they actually hold thousands and thousands of hectares of land that they are actually fracking, doing in Argentina and in the global south what they cannot even do at home. And oftentimes they're promoted and subsidized to do so. And then in turn, the products of this, in this case, the biggest product is gas, shale gas that is extracted, is then exported back into Europe, where the governments are using billions of euros to subsidize the construction and the expansion of a lot of LNG terminals. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas, which is the form in which the gas is transported over the oceans. They liquefy it, compress it 600 times, freeze it to minus 160 Celsius degrees, and then it can be transported, and then it's imported into Europe through these terminals that are being built with public funds. Germany, for example, has committed to building 3 LNG terminals in Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven, and Stade with millions of euros of public funds to import this gas. And in fact, the Minister of Finance recently even pledged an additional billion euros of public funds to import more American fracked gas. So this is really serious, especially when science has shown that shale gas or fracked gas has the biggest carbon footprint of any fossil fuel, actually 40 to 60% higher than even coal. So how is it possible that Germany and Europe is pledging to move away from coal, and they are proposing to replace it as a transition fuel with something that is actually much worse, and that also involves a form of colonialism that involves the destruction of the global south with techniques such as fracking that are banned in Europe. This cannot go on, not only because it's injustice, but also because Europe will also pay the consequences of global warming. So we cannot afford this hypocrisy anymore. When we published the first report, the secret report, on March 16th, 2018, the initial response was surprising. The next day was a Saturday. All the government agencies and official websites from the government and different media went out to say the opposite, to deny our report. They're saying that fracking had not contaminated anything. Pretty much they used all the infrastructure they had and all the power and the established media, which, by the way, the biggest media conglomerate in Mendoza province were the owners of the company, the fracking company. So that gives you an idea of what we were up against: the media, the government, the multinational companies, and the weaponized justice system. So it took a while until we could break through the fractures in the system, as they were contradicting one another over the report. First, they said it was fake. Then they said it was partially true, but it was mistaken and it was being misinterpreted. But eventually, they were contradicting one another between the different government officials. And we managed to get some interviews in small local media that became viral through social media. And when they heard our story, and I being a scientist, people believe a scientist much more than they believe a politician, luckily. So even with no money, no power, no media, just a couple of local radios from tiny, tiny towns, the video, the sound, the interviews became viral, and they managed to alert the people of what was going on. So that was what, a month or so later, we ended up having thousands of people on the streets. As I said earlier, we, in the town where I was living, we mobilized 15,000 out of a population of 30,000. Of course, did not make it to the media. Almost no reporting of what was the biggest march against fracking in Argentina and maybe world history. And then the mobilization continued, and we continued to leak information on conflicts of interest, such as, for example, the vice dean of the university I mentioned, who was also the representative of the fracking company, and many other info on corruption and conflicts of interest and hiding information. And then I mostly focused on the action, on trying to mobilize and keep the pressure so that we could get the law against fracking approved in the parliament of the province, which took a lot of fighting and in turn a lot of persecution, which became more and more intense. The government was really coming down on people that were joining the demos. Some people had to leave the province, not just me. They were threatened or they were persecuted. Some people were jailed. So it was a very intense year. And at the end of the year, the government managed to approve a code of conduct that was resembling something that Argentina had during the dictatorship in the 70s, that makes it illegal to demonstrate, makes it illegal to criticize government officials. And if they like, they can put you in jail or they can give you big fines, even for saying things on social media about the governor. So that was like the final nail on the coffin that really brought down people from mobilizing as they became more and more scared. And in that context, it was that later the death threats against me and my family intensified, and we had to leave at the beginning of 2019. Yeah, I knew when the moment I started this that it was almost likely, it was like committing suicide. I knew that the forces we were about to fight were so big and so dark and so corrupt that they could put us out any moment, that I could be assassinated any time. But also I felt that if I didn't get involved, the same would happen in the long term, because anything that we were doing, trying to build an eco village, have a healthy life, was doomed if fracking was to continue and take hold of the province, as everything would get contaminated. The little water there was would be gone. The trees that we were planting by the hundreds would be drying up, and the houses we were building could be collapsing due to earthquakes. Mendoza is already highly seismic, and to bring fracking to a seismic region, as fracking causes earthquakes, and that's the reason it's been banned in much of Europe, like in the UK with a moratorium last year. It was a recipe for disaster. So for me, there was no option but to get involved and fight. And then, yes, I got also explicitly death threats. But yeah, I think I'm lucky to be able to tell the story. But Latin America in general has the highest number of assassinations of environmental defenders over the last 15 years. Out of about 1,500 murders in the world, 75% of those happened in Latin America, mostly to indigenous land defenders. So the situation is really dangerous there. And that's why also we have so much power and responsibility here in the global north. And we've been organizing actions of international solidarity to amplify and give more power to the actions in the front lines in Argentina, in the global south, in Latin America, by mobilizing together with them and putting pressure on the European governments and companies that are playing a major role in this ecocide. Well, I think that we are going into an era where after the pandemic, the thirst for resources, the hunger for resources is only going to expand. And the economic crisis that we are already beginning to face and that I believe is only going to get worse is going to be used to justify expanding extractivism in the global south, always at the hand of companies and governments from the global north that are requiring such resources like minerals and gold and oil and gas. And I think there is ever growing responsibility and power for people here in the global north to stop that and to change that. As usually, governments in the global south are merely secretaries to the companies. They are so corrupt. And even if they wanted to change anything, they have no power. The companies usually have a bigger GDP than the country they're in, that where they're operating. So the power dynamics are very disproportionate. But here, if we could influence public opinion in Europe, where the environmental movement is strong, and we could realize that the climate movement, the climate fight, is not a fight of statistics, it's not a fight of abstract declarations, but it's actually a human issue where the global south is being sacrificed so that the global north can continue its consumption and its industry and so on. And also that there is no planet, there is no winning the climate fight unless we can stop this colonialism, because much of the global warming of the world, the top 100 polluters of the world are global north companies mostly, and their operations are mostly taking place at the front lines in the global south. So there is a lot that we can do if we can put pressure on, such as Wintershall from Germany is the biggest independent oil and gas company of Europe, and nobody ever seems to have ever heard of them. They are headquartered in Kassel, and yet nobody knows. And it's the biggest oil company of Germany. So how is it possible? And they're fracking Argentina and the rest of the world. So last December, on December the 11th, we did an action of international solidarity where we went to the headquarters, to the office of Wintershall in Berlin, and people in Argentina mobilized, and also in many places of the world against other oil companies, and beginning to connect the dots of extraction and consumption and do actions on the same day together. In Berlin, there was a Mapuche group of activists who, Mapuches are a native people that are living in Vaca Muerta. They are paying the highest price for fracking with their lives, with their communities being destroyed. And we had a group of Mapuches that are in Berlin who came and joined the action. That was very powerful. So we can connect the people from the front lines and the movements of Europe that are usually blaming themselves for being too white, but we can actually mix it up and, put Europe in a way at the service of the front lines, the people on the front lines that are fighting survival fights in the global south. I think that the way to create more awareness is to try to reach out to find people on the front lines, to get out of the bubbles that we are in Europe, and try to reach out and see, okay, there's a very nice project called Environmental Justice Atlas online, where they have begun to map some conflicts in the world, environmental conflicts. It's not complete, but it's a great start. And you can even search by company and search by industry. So you can find where are German companies or European companies that are involved in some destruction in Latin America or in Africa or beyond, and try to find the resistance movements and contact them and see how can we help you. We know there is a German company that is destroying your land. Maybe there's something we could do here in Germany. I think if we turn the pressure onto the governments of Europe and the companies in Europe, for example, to force governments in Europe to stop, to regulate the companies, to stop them from doing abroad what they cannot do at home, that would be a huge victory, because that would put an immediate end to the operations such as fracking that are destroying the world. And by the way, which has been shown by science, fracking has been shown to be responsible for more than 50% of all of the world's increased methane emissions over the last decade. So methane is 87 times worse than CO2 for the atmosphere on a 20-year period. It's really a climate time bomb. So there is no way we can achieve the Paris Agreement or any climate goals if fracking continues to go on. So the way, I think, is just to try to break out of the bubbles and reach out to the people on the front lines and begin to do international solidarity actions like we are trying to do. Yeah, I am very optimistic because I have been very surprised by the action we just did on the 11th of December. That as soon as we have the video, I will send it to you. There's been a lot of countries mobilizing. Most of Europe has mobilized, tackling different companies and tentacles of the fracking industry, and the people in the global south, in South America, in Asia, and in Africa coming together, despite being in the middle of a global pandemic, that we were able to pull this action. And here in Europe, we had Ende Gelände, we had Extinction Rebellion, there's people from Fridays for Future in different places. And since my arrival almost 2 years ago now in Germany, I've been getting involved in organizing and helping organize these kind of fights in different places of Europe, such as in Ireland and Spain. And I also joined actions in Sweden and other places. And I am really surprised to see how much energy is beginning to gain momentum right now. And I think as soon as this is embraced by Ende Gelände and Extinction and Fridays for Future more and more, I think fracking has its days numbered. Europe is the world's biggest importer of gas, which means that if Europe is to close the gates to the import of this gas, which Trump was very desperate for Europe to import and was bullying his way to get these terminals built, if Europe closes its gates to frack gas on climate grounds, is the end of fracking all over the world, because the industry is also struggling, it's a financial bubble, and then it will save Argentina and beyond. So I'm very hopeful, and I think that hopefully within this year, we can bring it down. And I'm making the case that we must bring it down this year if we are to have a chance at succeeding in the climate fight.